Welcome to the Exploring Neurodiversity podcast for adults who support neurodivergent children. Whether you're an allied health professional, medical professional, education professional, or a parent of a neurodivergent child, you are welcome here. This podcast is recorded on the Aboriginal lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal people. I acknowledge the traditional owners, elders past and present, and I extend my acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and First Nations people listening in. I'm Adina from Play, Learn, Chat. I'm an autistic ADHD speech therapist, professional educator, speaker, and I also support neurodivergent business owners in my other business, Neurodivergent Business Coaching and Consulting. I'm obsessed with creating a world where neurodivergent people are understood, embraced, supported, and celebrated. A world where we neurodivergent people can understand ourselves and thrive in a life aligned with our individual strengths, wants, and needs. On the Exploring Neurodiversity podcast, you'll get my perspectives and conversations with my neurodivergent friends, all about how adults can best support neurodivergent children in our lives. I bring a neurodiversity affirming approach and indeed a human affirming approach to the support that we all provide for neurodivergent kids in our lives. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome, Alex.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It is such an honor and a pleasure to have Alex Zachos here on the Exploring Neurodiversity podcast. If you haven't come across her work, go and check it out straight away. You know how exciting and wonderful it is to be sharing this space with you. So just a little bit about Alex. She runs Meaningful Speech and, I'm just saying, Social Butterfly Inc. Is that the name of your actual company?
That is the name of my brick and mortar private practice.
Here we go. And obviously, I was like, I don't know that. Not so surprising because your online presence is Meaningful Speech.
Yes.
And so she's a founder, director, clinical owner, and senior speech language pathologist. And she's been a practicing SLP for 20 years. And she's worked extensively with Gestalt Language Processors since 2016 using Marge Blanc's natural language acquisition framework. And Marge has been on the podcast too. So I will link in the show notes to my chat with Marge, which was an utter joy. So Alex educates SLPs, parents, and related professionals through her social media platforms, podcasts, blogs, and internationally acclaimed courses on meaningfulspeech.com, one of which I am midway through, and it is just so clarifying for me. I absolutely love it. And just your work out there has been so pivotal in bringing all the work of Dr. Barry Prezant and Marge Blanc and all their amazing work, and you have brought it to a really usable format for so many parents, speech therapists, and others. So thank you for everything you've done so far.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the course. And I'm so glad that you're enjoying it. And that's what I feel like something I'm really good at is simplifying heavier or harder to understand information. And I feel like I've been able to do that with Gestalt language development.
Absolutely. That totally comes through in your course. Your examples are amazing. And I have a lot of courses and webinars out there as well. And what I find incredibly hard to do that you've done so well is have the real videos. I find it very hard to get the right videos and then follow up the consent and then put it in the right place. And just, it's very admirable and very practical. So thank you for doing that.
I have all of my clinic families to thank for that, just allowing me to show their kids. I do have to say, though, now that things have gotten a bit bigger with meaningful speech, no one really wants to be shown, but we've been able to still give out free content on social media by blurring faces and still kind of showing what this might actually look like.
Yeah, it's such a tricky line, isn't it? Figuring out the best way to show things is not always the best for the individual if they want a little bit of
Right.
anonymity. Anyway, you do a beautiful job. Thank you. And for those listening who are not familiar with this subject, we're going to be talking about GLPs, which stands for Gestalt Language Processing or Gestalt Language Processors, depending on how we're using it. NLA, natural language acquisition, is the theoretical framework that Marge Blanc put forward. And I think we need to acknowledge straight off the bat that we're in a very weird time in like the history of these concepts and these ideas, with this idea that there is a different way or a continuum of different ways of learning language, from analytic language acquisition, this like one word plus one word and now I have a phrase or two words together, that many of us, me included, were taught in linguistics. This is how children learn language. And then now, I say now, newer to me and to many of us, is this idea of Gestalt language processing. I would define it. I'm going to let you. Do you have a beautiful, like, one-liner how you personally define Gestalt language processing?
my elevator pitch? Well, first, I always start by saying Gestalt language development is language development. It is a normal, natural way to develop language. However, most of us were not taught about it in either college, graduate school, or life. So, if you are not a speech language therapist listening to this, you might be a parent or another professional, but no one has probably ever brought up Gestalt language development to you. And you've just assumed that all kids learn language the same way, babbling, first words, two-word combinations, and then eventually sentences and mini conversations. Usually by the age of 5, they sound like mini adults. So we were taught in the speech language field that if a kid doesn't sound like that or hasn't gotten to that point by, let's say, 3 to 5 years of age, then there's something wrong. Then their language must be disordered. But in the case of a Gestalt language processor, they are not disordered. They are usually delayed in their language development. And we can kind of link to some things that go through all 6 stages of Gestalt language development. But I'll just say, to simplify things, Gestalt language processors have about 2 extra stages to go through before they get where their analytic peers start, which is single words. And so, unfortunately, as SLPs, we've often worked with clients without being fully educated on Gestalt language development and try to start with them at the word level. And then, if you're an SLP listening to this, you might say, yes, that's what I've done. I've tried to give kids more words. Then we don't often see success with those kids because we are completely skipping the stages of echolalia and mitigated echolalia.
Thank you for that. It's much more coherent than my explanation was about to be, so I appreciate that. And just in terms of echolalia as well,
There are 2 types: immediate echolalia and delayed echolalia. So I'll say they both serve a purpose, and often GLPs use both. But when we talk about Gestalt language development, the first stage is delayed echolalia. So immediate echolalia, while again, it does serve a purpose, it's not part of Gestalt language development.
and I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is where your meaningful speech name has come from. This that underpins the whole philosophy. Like the one thing, the biggest picture message is I was certainly taught this in university, and I'm trying to think in my early career years whether I said this to families, this idea that echolalia is, it's just echolalia. It's just repeating sounds. Ignore it, doesn't mean anything. What do you say to that?
Yes. I mean, I think you're a lot younger than I am, but that is what I was taught to say as well many, many years ago. And it was disappointing to me when I started meaningful speech and started talking to new grads and they said to me, "Well, that's what we're still being told." So yes, that's where meaningful speech came from. Actually, one of my former interns helped me come up with the name because I wanted something that conveyed that. And like meaningful is such a great word, right? Because echolalia is meaningful. And I always say echolalia communicates. Often it is communicating to us. Sometimes it's communicating something about the person's body or their likes or dislikes or their regulation, but it is communicating something. And to look at it like it's meaningless and ignore it or redirect it is just going to cause frustration for the echolalic person and the professional.
And this is where it all links back to neurodiversity affirming practice and just being a person who sees your clients for who they are. I'm 100% on board. I'm sitting here nodding away because if we don't listen, and by listen, I mean notice and pay attention to the child in front of us and believe them, what are we doing?
Right.
Like, we just have to. We have to trust that individuals know themselves and their families know them. And anyway, we could go on another rant, but let's try to keep on track. Basically, I think your name is brilliant. I think what you communicate is just so, so useful and so practical. So, like I was saying, this is a bit of a weird time in the world of speech pathology and what is Gestalt language processing and is it a real thing? We're getting a lot of articles and presentations out there, and there's just a body of work and a bunch of people who love to literally say that they're just not going to listen to autistic people. They're not going to listen to people with lived experience, people who are Gestalt language processors or who claim to be, in their words, they don't believe them. there's a lot of people basically saying this isn't a valid construct. So what I wanted to do now, in the chat I had with Marge Blanc, we went quite deep into the sort of history and this aspect of it. What's going on with people kind of putting their hand up and saying, no, 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 it's not valid. I was hoping that our chat would be very hopeful, positive, practical focused mostly. So I'm hoping that you and I can talk about what can we do, establishing this idea that GLPs exist. I mean, I, for example, identify as one. It's a concept that makes just so much sense. It resonates. It rings true for me, for the kids I've supported. For anyway, let's say GLPs exist. Most of our chat, we're going to focus on what can we do? How can we support them? But I think we have to acknowledge there is this wave of people denying the validity or questioning the validity of this concept. So maybe we could just spend a couple of minutes just chatting about, like, what would you suggest to speech therapists who might get questions from colleagues, bosses, from parents who say, oh, but I heard that this Gestalt language processing isn't real or it's not evidence based. Is there anything you want to share there that you would support people to say?
Absolutely. So years ago, I created a post that's actually pinned to my Instagram page, basically about how to address naysayers or people that have criticism or don't believe that it's real. And I kind of give the exact language in that post. But it's kind of funny because back when I wrote it, I don't feel like there were a lot of naysayers. And now I just feel like it's so relevant, which is why it's pinned, because things have definitely changed and shifted a bit. And I think what I learned over time in educating people is there seem to be a couple distinct groups. So there's a group of SLPs and professionals that will say to me, well, this is intuitive. I've been doing this all along. I just didn't know what to call it. Or also part of that group, they'll say to me, well, I knew that doing compliance based things were not a good fit, but I didn't know what else to do. Thank you for introducing me to something else. And then the second group is the group that I just feel is really married to behaviorist or compliance based techniques. And anything else that is sort of introduced in there is immediately just squashed down. Like, this just does not fit with what we know and what we teach and what we practice. And I feel like that group, the latter group, has become more vocal in the more recent years. And my advice for SLPs is to be very honest with your clients. I have a very small private practice, but when clients come to us, I'm always honest with them. I try to meet them where they're at in their journey. And I will just say to them, I might not be like other SLPs that you've met before. I have a child led approach. This is what that means. This is how I'm going to look at language with your child. And I kind of lay it all out there. SLPs that have reached out to myself, my team, oftentimes will say, well, this parent got upset with me, or they thought I was doing this, or they asked for homework, or they're wondering why I'm not sending worksheets. And then most of the time, if we're like, hey, did you actually have a conversation with them? It's like 9 out of 10 times they haven't. They just like launched into the session or the evaluation or whatever it might be. So I think, just as scary as it is, having that preliminary conversation so the family knows where you stand, you kind of lay out there what type of therapist you are and see whether you're a good match for them and they're a good match for you. I think that that is going to lay a really great foundation for moving forward. And there have been families, even with me, even at this point, where you would think that they would understand that I'm very ND affirming, child led. But there have been families that have said, well, I want this. And I think my child needs to do this. And I'll say, well, that's not how we're going to do things here. And that might not be the right match. That's not where they're at on their journey.
Isn't that interesting? And your profile out there is so well known, but it sounds like some people come in still not quite getting it. And I tell this to therapists all the time that, well, anyone who has a business, it's like you at every stage have to educate people about your approach quite
Yeah.
explicitly.
And I'm so glad that you give that advice, because I don't think enough of us do that. And then the biggest complaint I get is the family says all we're doing is playing. Like, do they understand what child led is and what your goals with this child are? need to have a conversation. And I think part of this is like a systemic problem because in a lot of workplaces, we don't build that time in to
Mhm.
have a meeting or to actually talk to them. The way that things are usually structured, at least here in the US, and some of these bigger clinics and hospital settings and schools as well, it's get in, do the evaluation, schedule all the therapy sessions. There isn't that let's have a parent meeting and sit down and talk about our goals. In schools, we do have IEPs, obviously, and that would be a really great time to bring this up at the IEP meeting. But I don't often see that in other workplaces.
And I think when it comes to private services, there's obviously a lot more flexibility, especially if you're the business owner. Like if it's your own practice, you get to choose how you run your whole thing. How do you let people know the information at what stage? How does the first session go? But I think even for therapists who work within any other system, there's still chance, whatever the service delivery model, I think there's still chance and necessity to let all the stakeholders know, especially family. But if you're in schools, it's going to be the teachers, the leadership as well. Just everyone needs to know the approach. How else can you be working to support a child who lives in these other environments?
And this is a good time to kind of bring up. I had a consultation on Tuesday with a speech pathologist. It was not her own private practice. She worked at a medium sized clinic. And she said, I'm meeting with you because I've taken your course. Two other speech therapists here have taken your course. We want to do what you're saying, but these kids are spending 40 hours a week in applied behavior analysis, or the school is structured in a way where they are basically doing compliance based things all day long. And so they're saying, we are not seeing the kind of progress that we've heard you talk about. And I said, you know why, right? And they said, yes. So what do we do about it? I think it was a really interesting conversation because first I told the SLP, give yourself grace. You're the only one in this child's life right now trying to do this. Nobody else is. And secondly, I said, we can't change the whole system overnight. So, one of the, I guess, pieces of advice I want to give now, since we brought this up, is if a family chooses or someone else chooses to do other services that don't align with NLA and child led, you have to at least show the other people and the family like what you're doing and let them sort of either come to you or draw their own conclusions. And the best way I've been able to do that is showing my data because a lot of these places are very data driven.
Hmm.
And so I teach this in my course. I have no affiliation with Google Docs, but I just like using Google Docs. And so I will use it to keep a language log. And if family and everyone else gives me permission, I share it with everyone on the child team. And that is my data. Our language samples are our data. And so when they see the language is changing over time and they see my data at every session, they start to get curious. And if and when I can, I will also attach or submit videos. And I think the really interesting thing about people doing compliance based services is a lot of times they don't realize they're always getting the same type of language because they're doing certain activities to elicit that language. And a lot of times they're very surprised at how much spontaneous language I get. Or I've heard things that they've never heard in their quote unquote activities. And a lot of times that will be the turning point for them. Well, how did you get that? And how do I get that? So I wanted to just talk about that a little bit because we can't change everything going on in a child's life, but we have the power to showcase what we're doing, and that might slowly start to change things.
I love that outlook. So it's not about getting into a bleak mindset thinking, oh, they're doing this other therapy that I don't agree with, or that other therapist isn't having conversations with me. It's actually going, well, I can just try. I can try and speak their language, meaning you're speaking the language of sharing data. I think there's another effect which you touched on, but I want to call out, which is you are this person in the child's life, one of the only, if not the only person who is slowing down to see that child, to be at that child's level, to meet them where they are, to enjoy the things they enjoy in their way. And that relationship can be so, so strong. And
Yes.
I think even if we're there an hour a week or less, I don't think anyone should diminish the power of the relationship you individually as a therapist can build with the child when you really see them and do a lot of the strategies that I think you might share with us that I teach and share a lot. I believe I will say I've had a little squeeze at your notes and I'm like, yes, 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 like not that it was a test, just in terms of, yay, we teach so many of the same ideas. Like in my course for speech therapists, I've got sections on some of this, and I'd love to hear what you say to these therapists that you're coaching and supporting. For example, you're seeing these changes in kids, and the other people supporting these kids are saying, oh, I didn't know they could say that. Like, what is it that you do? What are these key strategies and ideas that other therapists can take on as they listen to this podcast and go, I can either give myself credit, I do this really, really well, or that's something I'm going to learn about more or try to do more of. What are some of these strategies, Alex?
Yes. So let's get into that. I think you said in my bio that I started shifting things in 2016 when I got a hold of Marge's book, and I read it cover to cover in a week and called her, and the rest is history. She started mentoring me and all of that. But I was part of the group of SLPs where I think I had stuffed down my intuition and just sort of listened to the experts around me. And I was very much deep into compliance based practices, and I was not seeing result. And I was feeling very frustrated. And so I'm going to walk you through gradually the changes I made because this doesn't happen overnight. And I'm actually in the process of re recording a couple modules in my course because I had originally recorded it in late 2021. And I feel like the way I explain things has changed so much that I want to go back in there and put this in there. And this is actually something I'm going to include. But the first major change that I made was realizing that I needed to focus on connection, and we say connection over compliance now, but connection, trust, and the relationship. Because I was following that model I talked about earlier, where I did the evaluation and then went into all the therapy sessions, and I didn't get to know what the child liked to play with at home, or I have so many kids that don't even quote unquote play. So just finding out what their special interests are. I have a little boy I'm working with right now who's really into washing machines, or he'll load and unload the dishwasher all the time, which is awesome for his family. Figuring out ways to bring that into the therapy room. And old me would not have done any of that because I had this like agenda, and I was also trained under the medical model of disability, which is fix this child. That was my training. And so I thought, okay, we need to get to functional play. We need to stop lining things up. We need to get in there and get him requesting and commenting. And now my number one goal in the evaluation and throughout my session is I want this child to trust me. I want to form a good relationship with them. I want to get connected because that's the foundation of everything. Okay, so how do you do that? You're going to do that through child led play. And what does that mean? That means I'm letting the child lead the session. So I am not coming in there with a laminated strip and a plan. Like, hey, we're going to work on these sentence strips, or we're doing these cards today. Or a lot of therapists will call themselves play based, which is not child led, because just because I have 3 or 4 toys in there, if I'm in there with this agenda, this is how we're going to engage with these toys, that's not child led. So I am really getting to know the child and the family as much as I can, figuring out what their special interests are. And so I usually tell people my 3-2-1 rule. So I have 3 toys or objects available in the room, 3-ish, and 2 are familiar to the child, so I know they love them. So I'm going to talk about one of my clients now. He loves letters, so there's always some kind of letter activity. And then he also loves bubbles, so I also have something, either just a typical way to blow bubbles, or I might have a bubble machine, or I did a reel once about like 10 different ways you could do bubble things. So I have something in there with that. Those are the 2 familiar. And then the third is something new-ish. So it doesn't have to be something I ran and bought off the internet. Sometimes I've brought in like an empty cardboard box, but something that is new to our sessions, new to the child, maybe somewhat fits with their special interests. And if they want to choose to engage with it, that's fine. If not, that's fine. Around the holidays, I'll usually bring in something holiday-ish, like a pumpkin around Halloween. They can fill it with things or not. But that newish thing gives us like new language opportunities. So the other mistake sometimes people make when they go into doing child led is they fall into the old way of thinking where people have taught us that autistic or neurodivergent kids need repetition. So it's like, oh, okay, every single time we're going to do the cars, and then we're going to do the track, and then we're going to read the book, and then we're going to sing the goodbye song. And every single time it's like this. And then we're wondering why we're not getting new or different language, why we're not getting spontaneous language, or why the child perhaps has a 3 alarm meltdown when one day I don't do that book. And actually, Rachel Dorsey has a great module about that in my course. I don't know if you've gotten to it yet, Adina, but she talks about what to do if you've made the mistake of making all of your sessions the same, the same, the same. And then the child has a meltdown when you try to change them.
Thing that crossed my mind right now, that there's such a large percentage of autistic people like myself who are also ADHDers. Like,
Yeah.
we don't have an exact number, but it's very large crossover. And I'm thinking it's always an interplay in my life to find the balance between routine and novelty. And these kids are the same, whether or not they're ADHDers as well.
Yeah.
There's still a balance. And I think everyone's going to benefit from somewhere on this continuum between same-ish or predictable-ish and familiar-ish. And like you said, introducing something that's new, different. Can I ask how you actually present that new thing, or like, do you care whether the child does anything with the new
I
activity?
don't care. Usually, it's not like I come in, like, it's more like it's available in the room. And then the 3, 2, 1 part I forgot to add on is I say 3, 2, 1 plus room to move. And so I know I'm lucky, I'm privileged, but I've got a gym space. And so I know my movers and shakers need to be seen in the gym space. I will walk SLPs through how to do movement in smaller spaces. Like, I'll talk about pop-up tunnels, foldable balance beams, scooter boards, things like that. But for a lot of our kids that are not quite into toy play yet, they want to be moving. And that's where we're going to be getting a lot of that spontaneous language, or swinging. I mean, it helps so many kids regulate. So there's that piece as well. I mean, even kids that are in stages 4, 5, and 6, and they're doing pretend play and they're having conversations, they still need room to move and they want to regulate as well. So, but I think it's super important for our early stage kids and our kids that are not into toy play yet. So I started doing those things, and that's the foundation of the changes that I made. And then when it came to natural language acquisition, the number one thing that I tell everyone to do is acknowledge all echolalia. I wasn't doing this before, believe it or not. I was telling kids things like no movie talk, or look, we're doing this. I was constantly redirecting or trying to stop it. I think I really knew inside that it was wrong, but I honestly had no other tool. And I remember I had gotten to a point of massive frustration, and I reached out to so many SLPs around me, like, what are you doing about this? What are you doing about this? And they were all telling me the same thing. Oh, well, we were taught to redirect it and ignore it. And I actually, the way I found Marge's book is I had posted in a Facebook group for private practitioners. And I remember it was like crickets. Nobody was like answering me. And then one day I saw a notification, and an SLP in Idaho said, oh, have you heard of this book? And I have shared this so many times in Marge, and I laugh about it, but I clicked on the link and I'm like, oh, like, is this from like the 1970s? Because she picked orange and brown for her cover. And I'm like, oh, that's why I haven't heard of this book. And then I looked at it and realized it was published in 2012. And I'm like, oh, it's like a fairly new book. No, I'd never heard of it. And I bought it, and that's how everything started for me. Nobody knew what to do. And I live in
Amazing.
like just outside of the third largest city in the United States. Okay. I'm like, how does no one know what to do?
It's so wild and amazing to be able to pinpoint these one moments, these it's a real sliding doors moments in your career, but how that impact has spread to so many professionals and therefore to so many kids and families they support is so cool to trace it back. And it's phenomenal. Like we are somewhere in the middle of this huge changing tide, which I think is mostly exciting, sometimes daunting. I don't know about you. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I know this question has gone on forever. I'm actually
That's
looking at
awesome.
our, like, have I shared all the
No,
strategies
it's
with
good.
people? I have
He
two
mostly
more
talked about
strategies.
yeah, I was gonna say we got to really the baseline was that sort of making connection with kids, building that relationship. And then you talked about acknowledging ecolalia kind of as the first strategy on top of that, I guess. What are the other main
Okay.
practical
The other
strategies?
thing is using more declarative language, which is narrating and commenting, and less questioning and prompting. I mean, I would love it if people just eliminated questioning and prompting for early stage GLPs. But in the beginning, I'm like, let's just do it less. And then the final one is more silence. So, practicing silence and being comfortable with silence in our session. I talk a lot about this in my free masterclass. You can probably link it in the show notes, and I'm probably going to talk about
I
it
will.
later as a resource or a tool. But a lot of people have said that that was really eye opening to them. I often encourage people to videotape themselves and watch it back if they can. And so many people realize how much they're talking in sessions. Again, I think we're trained to just go in there and talk, and that's what's going to elicit language from a child. But and Marge is the original one that taught me this. I think she said something along the lines of silence brings about more spontaneous language. And so many things I think that she initially was teaching me in 2016, 2017. I was kind of like, really? Because I had never seen it in action. But then when I actually started doing it, I was blown away. So that's another thing that I think is interesting with some of the naysayers and the criticism. I just want to say go spend a day and sit in sessions with Gestalt language processors. Like, actually watch this happen and realize that it's real. Because if you haven't, I can see how you would kind of question it if you had been spending so many years doing the opposite.
Yeah, that's crucial. And I think that's where I get all excited, frustrated about the ivory tower of academia. Folks who can be so disconnected from the people that they're talking about. But
Mhm.
that is a conversation for another day. So we're on video now, Alex and I, but everyone's gonna get the audio, not the video of us. But I was like clapping along when you're talking about the silence. I teach the exact same thing in some of my webinars and courses as well, and how uncomfortable that can feel as a professional. Some of the comments, I'm sure you hear it as well. Some of the comments that people say about this is, "Oh, but they're being the parents or the other adults in the room. They're gonna expect me to be saying something." Like you think that you have to perform as a therapist all the time, but that's not it. It's like the relationship, that connection with the kid is actually your first job and not the performing of interaction, but the real true deep interaction, which for many and I know not all Gestalt language processors are autistic, but many are. And for many autistic people like me, certainly a nice way of connecting and interacting is to be near someone and to have that kind of presence and that parallel play, whatever that can look like as a grown up or a grown up and child dynamic, either way. For many of the kids that I support as well, it's that same thing. Is some of the best ways we can connect with them is not by talking at them, labeling everything they do, or always interjecting into their play. It's just being present and honoring they may have quite limited social capacity, sensory systems that need not to hear talking all the time. There's so many great reasons that silence is important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing those. And at the end, I'll get you to share what some of the next steps are that people can take to keep learning with you. But I think this is going to help many people. Like, I wanted to get some quick wins. I want people to listen and go, okay, yeah, I can do some of that a bit more or learn a little bit more about that. Tools, cheat sheets, helpful things. What is helpful when somebody is working with a Gestalt language processor and they think that this child is using Gestalt and they think, I really want to understand what that child might be meaning with that gestalt. I want to understand how I can connect with them further on that topic. But I don't know. I don't know all the things that they're watching on YouTube. I don't know all the shows that they're watching. I don't know their favorite. I can't be across everything. What are some of your favorite tools that make it easier for professionals to kind of get into the child's world or get some clues?
Yeah, we actually just created a handout about this. Katie Arnold did. She wrote our Gestalt Language Processing handbook and just updated it. So if you are out there and own it, the second edition is available now. All our updates are free and called Gestalt, Be a Gestalt Detective. And so I'm going to give it to your audience too. We sent it out. So I will send it to you to share with them. And we have all the websites on there where you can look up gestalts like getyarn.io, Subsin, Pop Mystic, Play Phrase. Because, yeah, you're right. You can't know every episode of Bluey, but you go in there, you type something in, you realize where it comes from. And that really, really helps you understand maybe why that child is using it as a gestalt. I remember back to Bluey that one of my clients found a balloon in one of the gyms. So it was like, she must have blown it up with another client. And she walked right up to it and said, "Keepy uppy." And at the time, my brain didn't go to Bluey, did not. I had no idea what was going on. But if you're a Bluey fan, they play a game with the balloon called Keep Yuppie.
And I'm just going
And
to jump in with the full gestalt that goes through my head, which is at the
yeah,
beginning of the song, because we listen to the album in the car. And there's mum going, "I've got a game for you." And the kids go, "Is it keepy happy?" It's keepy happy. And so we do this at home with my family. I say to my daughter, "I've got a game for you." And it's not always keepy happy. And that's the joke. We subvert the gestalt.
it's mitigated, right? So I love these sites. And so we have them in a handy dandy handout that you can kind of check out. Other resources, I say start with all the free stuff first. So we do have paid resources where you could get very deep into our courses, but for free, check out our masterclass. We have a general one and one for AAC and GLP. Almost 40,000 have watched both, which is incredible to me. But I just want to keep spreading that around because it's for parents, staff, educators, anyone. I have joked around about sharing it with bus drivers because it's just a really good introduction for anyone who has a GLP in their life. Tons of free information on Marge's Communication Development Center website. We have our weekly blog and all the podcasts I've been on. This one will be included. And our blog comes out every Thursday, and that's really shareable and easy for parents. And then, of course, our social media posts. I know social media has turned into lots of different things. Our site, I feel like, is just our page is very educational, all about educating. So you're not going to go on there and see what I ate for breakfast. I actually tried that when I first started the Instagram because everyone's like, "Oh, everyone needs to know you and trust you." I'm like, nobody really needs to know what I'm doing right now. And so our page is strictly just to educate you.
That's such an amazing list of resources. I personally am interested in what you had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because I know we're recording late in your day, but that's okay. I am going to put links to the things that you shared. They'll be in the show notes and to that handout you're very generously sharing. And I love that it's called Gestalt Detective because that's exactly what I was thinking. That detective work so beautifully named again. And there's something you're mentioning. I know it's your newer course, is the AAC for Gestalt Language Processors. I would love to hear anything like any big key ideas that you want to share about how it's different using AAC. And for those who don't know, the acronym is Augmentative and Alternative Communication, which refers to anything that's not speech technically, but I think often in the broader world people think about it as sort of the iPad that talks for you, I guess, to like put it in layperson's terms. Yeah, so I mean, does your course cover specifically like high tech or not necessarily, and anything that you wanted to share about different strategies using or introducing AAC with Gestalt language processors as opposed to analytic language processors?
Yes. So Laura Hayes is a SLP and AAC specialist, and she teaches our AAC for Gestalt Language Processors course. I'm in there a little bit in the beginning, but Laura does go through low tech and high tech options. She'll talk about speech generating devices. I mean, favor those because they're robust. The child can grow with them, but we know that low tech can be great when there aren't other options. We actually have a great low tech book that you can download that comes with the course. But the bonus modules are going to cover all the most popular apps and show you how to program them for GLPs. So, here are a couple just quick tips. The reason that this whole course exists is because AAC, both low tech and high tech, was basically created for analytic language processors. And a lot of the AAC courses that are out there are constantly pushing like core and fringe vocabulary and words, words, words. And we know that our GLPs are not quite ready for that until they're in stage 3. So the tip is do not erase anything because it needs to be there. We want it to grow with the child. So I think that was a big thing people were doing at the beginning, erasing things. So we say, do not erase. We're going to add. So I like to add things in to support stages 1 and 2. I have a little reel I shared during AAC Awareness Month last year where I just walk people through exactly how to program a gestalt into, I think it's TD Snap, but really it can be for any device. I am just quickly going to tell you that I like to have the whole gestalt on one button. And then I like to put in language the child already has because that is buy in. They love to go on there and see their own language. And so even if they are communicating some of that with mouth words, it's still going to be on their AAC device. And then I also like to put in what I call potential gestalt. So we haven't gotten into all of this today. Adina, you might have seen it in my second module, but I go through all the communicative functions categories like shared joy, transitions, help, protest, self advocacy. So I'm going to go through all of those within my mind with this child and pick what I call some potential gestalt. So let's say I have a child that doesn't know how to self advocate, isn't protesting, none of that. So parents and I decide that we would love to hear something like, don't touch that, or stop, or even just not now. And so we might put some of those on the device as potential gestalt. Maybe the child chooses to communicate with them or not, but they are available. So it's a mix of what's already there and potential gestalt. And what's great is a lot of our GLPs are musical. So if they are singing like a song from Daniel Tiger, I can go and put the whole song right there on the button or in most of these devices, not all of them, but I can't get into the details about that now. But having that feature is excellent because then they're hearing it the exact same way that it came in.
That is such a cool idea, and it's something I wanna do for myself, like, a simple way of accessing my favorite gestalts to hear them because 'cause they're so joyful, and then to say them if I feel like it. So cool. I wanna play more. I need to get into that. Thank you. Such cool tips. I'm like, "How can I use this as an adult?" That's a whole separate section. We have so many, like, sidebars we could have taken. We've stayed very on topic. I'm quite proud of us. So there's so many ways to keep learning from Alex, and one of them, if you do feel like getting into any of her courses. Obviously, there's the free masterclasses and resources in the show notes. Alex has generously shared a code with the audience, which is Adina, top secret. It's my name. And if you get any of her paid offers and use that, you will get 5% off. And there's just so many amazing resources. Like I said, I'm in the middle of your meaningful speech course, and I thought I knew a lot about this stuff, but not with this level of specificity or depth. So I appreciate it so, so much. Is there anything else that we're missing? Like, what haven't we touched on? Is there anything that you feel we really want to share with parents and professionals who support neurodivergent children?
Oh, I would like to share just get started. That is my piece of advice for everyone. Start small, start with one child or student, write down what they say and start to practice scoring using the natural language acquisition framework. If this is very new to you and you're a speech language pathologist listening to this, I think it would be very difficult to like walk in and change what you're doing with your entire caseload. But if you just start really small and target, like I said, one child or student, that is what I did. And then from there, as your knowledge grows and you feel more confident, you can spread it out to other people. But I think I just don't want people to feel like, oh, I don't know how to do this with everyone and it feels too daunting and too difficult. So just start small.
I love that. It's achievable. It's realistic. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your just everything that you've shared, not just in this bubble here, but in your whole career and what you do put out there. It's so important. And I feel like, I don't want to frame it in terms of battle, but if we were going into battle, we're on the same team. And I love that, but there's no battle. We're just here to support the kids.
Definitely.
Thank you, Alex. And I hope we'll speak again.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. See ya. Thank you so much for sharing this space and time with me. Thank you for being open to learning and unlearning and to listening to the perspectives and experiences of neurodivergent folks. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend, share a screenshot on Instagram, pop a 5-star rating and a review in your favourite app, and join me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm at play.learn.chat. Have a spectacular day.